First of all, I'll just answer the question I've already gotten, which is, how did I find them and how did I decide to write these books? So I was working on, well, actually I have it, I'll show you. I was working on my previous book before this one, which is called The Drunken Botanist. It's a book about all the plants that we turn into alcohol. So it's nonfiction. And believe it or not, there is a guy in here named Henry Kaufman. He's a gin smuggler.
Oh, wow.
And so I was just trying to find out more about this guy, Henry Kaufman, before I put him in Drunken Botanist. And I found a lot of Henry Kaufmans who've gotten up to all kinds of things, and I don't really know who is who. It got to be hard to figure out. But one of the Henry Kaufmans I found from that time period was the guy who ran his car into the Kopp sisters' horse and buggy. So I found that story in the New York Times newspaper from 1915. And, this happens all the time when you're doing research. You go looking for one thing and you find something else you weren't really looking for, and it's easy to get sidetracked. But kind of got to stay focused, right, and keep moving. But I thought it was a really interesting story, and I kept digging and realized it's a much bigger story. I mean, after the events in Girl Waits with Gun, a lot more happened to Constance and her sisters. And these books continue to tell their true story. Like, for the most part, everything is true. It mostly really happened. So I realized it was a much bigger story, so I kept digging and kept doing more research. And at first, I was mostly doing research online. Like newspapers.com is a database you have to pay to subscribe. But so I just started collecting newspaper articles. I went on to ancestry.com and built out their family tree. Some of you might be into genealogy and you know how addictive ancestry can be. I'm in there all the time. And that allowed me to connect to family members, other people working on the same family tree. The other thing I did is I hired a genealogist in Bergen County, New Jersey, to get some documents out of courthouses and start dealing with the things that are not online that you have to get in person. And of course, eventually, once I was really sure I was going to write these books, I started flying out to New Jersey to do research. So that's kind of how that process happened. That's how it all got started. I knew right away that it should be a series because a lot happened in their lives and it feels very episodic to me, the way it breaks out. But the Toms River connection is this. One of the people I was able to connect with through Ancestry as I was working on the family tree was Florette's son. So it seems kind of amazing that her son could even still be alive, but she was the youngest and she had him a little later in life. And that explains how that's possible. He's in his 80s. And he was at the time living in Toms River. So I got on a plane right away and flew out to Toms River to talk to him and hear about his mother, Florette. And also he knew a lot about his Aunt Norma because he remembers Norma from when he was a little boy and she lived with him for a while. And of course, his mother would have talked about both Norma and Constance, I'm sure, over the years growing up. So it was amazing. I cannot even tell you how much it meant to me to get to meet someone who personally knew these people that I'm writing a book about. Like that just, it blew my mind. And he's a super sweet, funny, smart, wonderful person with a great memory and a lot of stories. And I came out a few times to see him and to talk more about his family. And he's been very gracious to me. You can only imagine how weird it would be to have a complete stranger call you up and say that they were writing not one novel, but possibly a lot of novels about your family. That's kind of weird. But he never acted like it was weird, and he understood that it was fiction and that I was going to have to change things. I mean, he was totally cool with the whole thing. So when Girl Waits with Gun came out, I did an event there in Toms River at the library, and Florette's son came to the event. So I got up on the little stage there and gave my usual talk. I've got a slideshow and I show people pictures and I tell them kind of the backstory. But then I was able to say, oh, and by the way, Florette's son is right here. And it was like a celebrity was in the room, and he got to get up and and say a few words and answer people's questions. And it was just the most wonderful thing. It was really fantastic. So yeah, so that is that's the Toms River connection. He has since moved to Florida, so I haven't had a reason to come back to your community, but I have been there 2 or 3 times. And I believe, actually, Florette is buried in the Toms River Cemetery. And if anybody wants to go check on that for me, you'll get extra credit. The times when I've gone, the hours have been wrong, and for one reason or another, I couldn't stay the next day to go look. So I believe she's there. I know I can look it up. There's a website called Find a Grave. So I can double check that, and sometimes it even gives the location. But I've been to visit their other graves, but Florette is not buried in Patterson with the others. I believe she's buried in Toms River. So I haven't gotten to visit her grave before.
Did she have a married name that we could look up?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Her married name is Birgel, Birgel. So yeah, you're right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. She'd be under her married name.
Okay.
Did she live in Toms River at some point, or did her son just bury her here because he lived here, or do you know?
Yeah, I'm not clear on that. She lived in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. Does that sound right? Elizabethtown? I expect you guys to know everything about every town on your side.
On the East Coast.
My husband's actually a walking atlas. I could probably ask him.
I know there's an Elizabethtown, New Jersey, but I don't know about
Pennsylvania. Maybe it is New Jersey then. Maybe it is Elizabethtown, New Jersey. Somehow in my mind I have her in Pennsylvania for a little while.
And that's anyway, up north, I think, right? Around where they came from.
I'm not sure. I should have looked. I have all this information. It's just not in my head right now. I should have looked it up before I got on the phone with you. But anyway, I'm not clear on whether she actually lived in Toms River.
Amy, is her son still alive?
Well, as far as I know, I write to him every year, and I always send him a copy of the book. I haven't heard back from him in a while, so I hope he's doing well.
And he still lives here in New Jersey?
No, he moved to Florida. Just a couple years ago, he and his wife moved to Florida.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. That's so cool. Do you want to give us is there anything else you'd like to give us as like sort of your prepared information, or you want us to kind of jump in with questions?
Yeah, I'm just here to answer your questions. So whatever you got.
Well, ladies, go ahead, Carol, Kay. I'm going to unmute you.
Me?
Yep.
Okay, there is an Elizabethtown, in Pennsylvania. It's near Lancaster.
Yep, I just looked that up myself. Yep.
That's Pennsylvania Dutch country.
Yep, it's right 20 miles southeast of Harrisburg, it says. It is.
There you go.
That's quite possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I got a research team here. I love this.
Let me tell you, these ladies are on it. They're on it. Yeah, and we live right here when I drive to the Y to work, I kind of pass by the old Toms River Cemetery, if that's the one where she's at. And not that it's to sound kind of morbid, but I'll you can snap a picture. It's like a historical thing. It's not.
Yeah.
I think that would be kind of neat. But do you ladies have questions that you want to ask? Like you want to each take a turn? I had also prepared a list of questions, but I don't want to be the only person with a voice here. So like if you guys each have a question you want, just like we can kind of, raise your hand or raise the hand on the little reactions, and we'll just kind of go one at a time so we don't bombard her. You guys want me to I'm going to unmute you guys all. Okay, I'm going to unmute, and I'm going to trust that we're not going to all jump in and talk at once. Okay. Oh, wait. Okay, everybody's still showing up as muted here. Even I unmuted you.
I'm kind of interested about Norma. You said that his Florette's son knew her and remembered her. I just wondered, was she really like that in real life, like you portray her in the books? Because she just, I don't know, she's always got the sternness about her,
Yeah, well, that was the really helpful thing about meeting him, is that I didn't know anything about Norma. She stayed out of the newspapers. She
Right,
did a
right.
good job of staying out of the papers. I don't have a photograph of her. I have no idea what she looks like, which drives me crazy because I
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
so she was a little bit of a mystery to me, what she was up to. So it was great that I was able to get a sense of her personality. And so, you
Right.
know, what he told me was that she was just this very difficult, disagreeable woman, very judgmental,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the way she comes across.
held a grudge
Very
forever and ever. Whatever you did, she would hold it against you forever. And I
Forever.
loved that because I thought, well, we all know somebody like Norma.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
I
Yeah.
might be somebody like Norma, at least some of the time. It's
And how
very,
did you decide about the pigeons to give her the
That
hobby
was
for
my
the pigeons?
question.
yeah. So what I felt that Norma needed something to do,
Mhm.
and she needed something that she cared about. Like she doesn't really like other people very much, but she has to care about something.
Right.
And I thought, well, you know, the women I know who are kind of like Norma, like maybe they don't like other people very much, but they love their little dog or
Yeah.
something. But I
Right.
didn't want to give her a little dog. That just seemed too easy. And besides, what am I going to do for $8 with a dog?
Right.
So, so I came up with this idea. You know, pigeons really were used for communication at that time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they were used in World War I, which is super interesting.
Mhm.
So I thought, well, okay, I could actually do something with this. Like this is actually, and I wanted it to be something that her sisters were kind of horrified by. You know, something that they
Yeah.
were totally disinterested in. So it's been fun. So yeah, it's totally fiction, but it's been fun for me to do because I get to find out a little bit about messenger pigeons and their history.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew
Yeah.
nothing about them either, you know,
Right.
really.
Yeah.
I didn't know they played a part in World War One. Had no idea.
Yeah. Well, you'll be finding out more about that if you
Okay.
keep reading the book.
Okay.
There's a lot more to come.
A little tease.
Yeah.
Speaking, like talking about Norma, one of the things that I was wondering about, like when, especially towards the end of the book that we just read, when you're writing those rejection letters, like that she's writing for Constance of all of the proposals that she's getting from these men, were any of those actual letters, or were you just like letting like your snarkiness kind of fly? Because I found them to be so funny. In just
Yeah.
that way that she was, just the way she worded it and stuff, I thought it was just really awesome. And I was wondering, is that an opportunity for you to kind of really just let it fly in there, or were any of them actually real?
Oh yeah, none of them were actually real. The letters that Constance received, I know that she really did get letters because I've read about that in newspaper articles. And you know, if you think about it, this is of course it's, you know, long before like social media or any of that. But we didn't even have, like, people didn't have radios yet. Like newspapers were everything. Newspapers were the only thing. So so you can imagine a man reading some article about a woman and just writing off a letter, like just, you know, whatever. You can see how that could happen, right?
Yep.
So, so that really happened to her. So what I did is I went into some of these digital newspaper archives and I looked for evidence of letters that men wrote proposing marriage to total strangers, because they, you know, never hurts to try, right? So they did. And I found some. I mean, I found some real letters. So some of the letters that Constance received are based on actual letters that that guys would send, or close, inspired by or close to it. But no, Norma's replies, I have no idea what happened with those letters or who replied to them. So that's all fiction.
Did you enjoy writing those though? It seemed like that would have been a really fun part of the book to write, just letting Norma just be her.
Right. Yeah.
Herself, right?
Right. You know, it's yeah. Well, you know, Norma kind of gets to say all the things that we wish we could say, but we know we're not supposed to. She has no.
Right, right.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Exactly.
I love the
Anybody
one
else?
love the one from the cowboy who wanted her to come out west.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the way some of those men were like the I think it was the last one in the book was just like, you know, oh, well, I know that, you know, you coming here will be so much better for you than the life you have in New Jersey. Come and be my wife and cook for the prisoners and do my ranch and do this and do that. That's so much better than being the sheriff, you know. Oh my gosh. And
Right?
they believed it. They would have believed that they were actually offering her something wonderful.
Yes, you can come out and cook my food and feed the chickens and milk the cows and.
Right.
Yeah,
Cook for 12 men. It's the same as cooking for your family, you know.
Right.
Whatever.
yeah.
That was crazy.
Says the man who's never so much as opened a can of beans for himself, probably, right?
Anybody else, you guys, please feel free. Like I said, I've got a bunch of questions prepared, but I don't want to be the only voice.
Well, you've just given me the next series of books that I'm going to be reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carol is in our crochet club. She's not a regular member of the book
Oh,
club.
okay, good.
Oh,
But
okay.
I'd like to join. I just don't have a car, so it's hard for me to get there.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we'll work that out. We'll get you.
So and originally, some of us thought that we were supposed to read The Girls on the March. So we got that and I read like 100 pages of it, and then they got the email saying, that's not the right book. Go get the other.
Should have consulted with Amy to begin with.
Yeah, well, that's okay. And, you know, I try very much to write them in such a way that, you know, somebody could just pick up any one of them and read them.
Right.
You wouldn't feel too terribly lost. So
Right.
hopefully it stands up no matter what order you read them in.
Right.
Yeah.
But they do a really good job of kind of filling in the gaps enough, just so you kind of get a feel for what's going on if you were to pick one up out of order.
Right.
So,
Well, you know, like when I started reading that and it said that Constance had lost her job, and I'm like, how did that happen?
Oh,
Because we,
oh, now you just, spoiler alert. Spoiler
yes,
alert.
Cindy, spoilers.
Cindy.
it's about them going in the army.
Go
So,
on mute.
well, the way I figure with a series is that once the other books are out, the like bare minimum information that they just print on the back of all of them
Right.
don't count as spoilers. It's like that's
right.
the like publicly available part of it.
Right.
Yeah,
And
you know things are going to change for them. You know things are moving
Right.
in another direction.
Yeah, and we do like to do research, about books when we're reading them. So, being that they are based on real people, you know, there are facts that we could come across. There are going to be in your books, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We will say it's a spoiler.
Yep.
You're off the
God
hook.
bless you.
Thank you.
I think that
one of the
Sheriff Heath
one of
is
the
an
questions
interesting
was-
person. Oh, go ahead, Cindy.
Can you tell us more about Sheriff Heath? How much
Sheriff
is
Heath,
he
yeah, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
find him intriguing for the time period.
Yeah,
He
yes,
seems
yes.
to be like with it as far as women's
Right.
rights and that's
Right.
Ahead of his time, yeah.
He was
Yeah.
very ahead of his time, and fortunately, because he was sheriff, he was in the papers all the time.
okay.
And even before that, he was deputy sheriff, and he was in the papers a lot. So I have lots of opportunities to get him in his own words and see how he behaves in different situations and what he has to say about things. But like, I also have a transcript of a speech he gave at a conference on what they called charities and corrections. So charitable services and jails. And it was really interesting to hear him in his own words talking about his ideas about law enforcement. You know, he was very progressive. He really
Yes.
believed at getting at the root causes of poverty.
Mhm.
He wanted there to be education and job training and other types of services for the inmates.
Right.
Which is amazing. Like, we're still arguing about that today, right?
Today, yep.
Like,
Right.
he would be progressive today for that.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And he offered church services, which was unusual.
Right.
And not only that, but in several different faiths. So that's extremely unusual.
Yeah.
So he did all that, and he very much believed that they needed a woman deputy. You know, the idea at the time was that we need women working in law enforcement because there are women and children coming into the legal system.
Right.
This was in an era when you could get locked up not only for committing a crime, but if you were a witness, they would lock you up.
Right.
We don't really talk about that much today, but it was a weird moment in time that we would do that. So before a trial, you might be locked up all the way until the trial happened, and all you are is a witness. And
Right.
the word witness was also meant victim. So like you could have been the victim of a crime and you're in jail. That happened, and it happened in his jail because he would talk very matter-of-factly about like, well, I have this much of a budget to feed the inmates and this much to feed the witnesses. So that was a thing. But so there's this, so women end up in jail for all kinds of reasons. And so there's this idea that we need women in law enforcement just to look after them because it's not proper to leave them alone with a man.
Right.
And
Right.
and it wasn't just an inference. I mean, Sheriff Heath came right out and said it. He used to say he'd be out talking to a club, and a men's club like the Rotary or something like that.
Right.
He would say, if your wife was arrested, you wouldn't want her to be in jail and the only person with a key to her cell is a male guard. You wouldn't like that, would you?
Right,
So there's just this assumption that women could get assaulted in jail. Like we just take that for granted. Like, well, of course that would happen. So we need a woman standing around to make sure that doesn't happen. So, so that was the idea behind bringing women into law enforcement. But still, even though it was a good idea and done for a lot of the right reasons, and also keep in mind that at that time, we didn't have the whole thing about if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you.
Right,
We didn't have that yet.
Right.
If you can't afford a lawyer, you don't have a lawyer. And especially for women, we didn't have money of our own. So, so women in law enforcement would also be sort of the informal advocate going before the judge and saying, look, judge, here's what I think. So there was a lot, there was a lot for her to do, but believe it or not, not all police chiefs and sheriff's deputies thought this, or elected sheriffs thought this was a good idea. So there was huge opposition to women coming into law enforcement. There still is today, actually. And I talked to a lot of women cops, and it's still not easy to be a woman cop. But at that time, it was a really big thing. So not only was he progressive for being in favor of it and for actively choosing to hire a woman rather than having it forced on him by a citizens group or something, but also he gave Constance all the same rights and responsibilities as the male officers. So she had a gun, a badge, she had arrest authority, and she was paid the same as the male officers, which is unheard of, completely unheard of. A lot of women in law enforcement were expected to work for free. It was like, well, you want this job, you don't expect us to also pay you. Like, it's bad enough that you got to be here. We're not going to pay you money also. But she got the same salary that the men got. So obviously Sheriff Heath was a really good guy with very progressive ideas, decades, if not centuries ahead of his time. He might still be ahead of his time today. And so not only that, but he took a lot of flack.
Yeah, she did. She took a lot of flack. Especially for taking down men and, the whole thing going down the subway steps, tackling that guy. She took a lot of heat for that.
And
the sheriff took it as well, you're saying.
Yes, the sheriff.
The sheriff did, and he always stood up for Constance, and he always defended his decision to hire her, and he never wavered in any of that. So that was a very brave thing for him to do.
Yeah, and all of the information about his wife, Cordelia or whatever, did you know much about her, or was she kind of just sort of embellished based on what you figured a wife of a sheriff would be like at the time?
No, to this day, I don't know that much about Cordelia, and I have actually met some of Sheriff Heath's descendants as well.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Are they still in New Jersey?
Yeah, I couldn't find them because, daughters get married and change their names. And I was just too lazy to do all the work. And I never did find the kids. But they reached out to me, or somebody reached out to me and said, do you want to meet Sheriff Heath's grandsons? Because I know
Oh my gosh.
And they're also kind of in their 80s. And one was interested in talking to me, one was not interested. He wasn't mad or anything. He just didn't care, didn't want to do it. That was kind of helpful. But then I did an event at the library in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and I'm there signing books afterwards. There's a line of people, and I'm signing books at a table and handing people their books. And I look up, and here's this guy standing in front of me, and he says, "Hi, I'm Sheriff Heath's great-grandson.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
my.
And he looked like him. He's sort of this kind of tall, handsome guy in his 40s and his same kind of coloring. But I was like, you look like your great-grandfather. And I just cannot tell you how weird it is to have someone standing in front of me who has the DNA of my
Yeah.
character.
That's awesome.
It was amazing. But anyway, so I've talked to these family members, but they don't know that much about Cordelia either. So I have some reason, just from like newspaper articles and other little documents I found, I have some reason to think that they had kind of a difficult marriage.
Yeah, it seemed like it.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Know that later on, this is not too much of a spoiler, but later on you'll see in future books, Cordelia had some really dreadful health challenges that you would not wish on anybody.
Oh, wow.
Especially in those days when there weren't good drugs or pain
Right,
medications. So
right.
she had a terrible, terrible time. And it can be fun to be married to a cop. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, right? That cops
Yeah.
have difficult marriages, but still, it could not have been easy for her to have to live at the jail.
Right.
Yeah.
And they don't put the jail in the nice part of town, right?
Right.
The jail was along the river with the factories and the tanneries and all the other stuff nobody wanted to see. So it would have smelled bad. It would have been really gross down there. And there were no neighbors and no parks and nothing for the children. It had to have been a really, so you know, I cast her as a very deeply unhappy person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there might be reason to think that she was unhappy.
Yeah, for sure. Does the jail still exist?
Yeah.
Did
The
you get
jail, believe it or not, the jail is under historic preservation, so it looks just like it looked in Sheriff Heath's day.
Wow.
They don't have inmates there anymore. They have a new facility, but they gave me a tour of the jail. So I was able
Oh,
to,
nice.
I've been inside,
Wow.
yeah, so I've been inside Sheriff Heath's apartment, which is offices now, but you can see how it would have been laid out as an apartment. And I've been inside his office and the jail cells, and they had a bunch of photographs that Sheriff Heath took or had taken, and they gave them to me on a thumb drive. So some of the pictures on my website come from the sheriff's department, and there's
Okay.
even a picture that I have reason to believe could be the cell where Constance spent the night. The one she
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
and there is at least one picture. Well, there's one picture that Constance is actually in, and the sheriff's department, they didn't know anything about Constance. They'd never heard of her.
Oh,
But,
really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Wow.
interesting.
I know.
That's unfortunate. Wow.
Yeah, the most. What's that?
They knew who Sheriff Heath was, though.
They knew who Sheriff Heath was because they had found these photographs and gotten them scanned. So, and it had his name on some of them. So that's how they knew about Sheriff Heath. But yeah, I was kind of surprised. Like they don't have, I don't know why I thought this, but I figured somewhere they would have like a glass case with some historical bits from their past. And also that they would know what their badges looked like, because
Right.
you can buy antique law enforcement badges. And I would love to buy a badge from the years when Constance was there, but they don't even know. Like, they don't know what the 1915 badge looked like. The
Wow.
one thing, I'll tell you, it's kind of a funny story. The one thing they know about their history that they're so proud of is the Bergen County Sheriff's Department, they are the ones who arrested Frank Sinatra.
Oh,
And it was for crossing state lines with a woman for an immoral purpose.
Oh, God.
That's why Sinatra was arrested. And if you go online and you search Frank Sinatra mugshot,
Oh,
you'll see a mugshot of him as a very handsome young man. And they have that mugshot on the wall, and they just have a shrine to it.
Oh,
Oh, that's a kicker.
yeah, well, he was a Jersey boy, so I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
love
got
Frank.
him. Oh,
Where
my
is the
goodness.
jail now?
It's just in downtown Hackensack. It's attached
Okay,
Oh.
to the
okay.
courthouse. It's right
Yeah.
along the river attached.
I
to
used to live in Cliffside Park, so I'm very familiar
Oh,
with that
okay.
area.
Did you ever see the jail? Carol?
I've been to the courthouse with a class from high school, but not the jail itself, no.
Yeah.
But I might be a trip up to Bergen County.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking I might have to take a hike up there.
Yeah.
March, did you have a question? Or was that Cindy who had her hand up? Cindy, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question about Fleurette. Like, so she never knew that that Constance was her mother all through her whole life?
So in real life, the story is a little different than how I tell it in the book. In real life, Fleurette was told that she was adopted, but she was not told who her parents were. And this would have been very normal at that time. Nobody thought,
Yeah.
there was no open adoption back then. Nobody
Yeah.
thought that children should be told anything.
Right.
So that's how it was. And then Constance kept that secret. So Constance died in the hospital, and she made out a will a few days before she died. So she obviously thought she might not make it. And Fleurette was there. So if she ever wanted to make a deathbed confession, she certainly had the opportunity to do it, and she didn't.
How
And
about that?
she listed Fleurette in her will as my adopted sister. So she kept that secret.
How about that?
But Fleurette did find out later.
Oh,
She did.
And also, Fleurette was in touch with her father, the singer sewing machine salesman.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's not clear to me whether they were in touch while Constance was alive or only afterwards. But he continued to work for the Singer Company, and, you know, she really was a very talented seamstress. And
Right.
I believe he got her, you know, maybe got her a job with Singer at one point or something. And apparently they exchanged some letters, and those letters are long gone. I'd give anything to
to see
see those
them.
letters.
Yeah.
If any of y'all find those letters in your basements, I will mortgage my house. There's money to be made in those letters. If you found them.
Wow. Yeah, I actually
You never know, though.
So when
I
she,
read on another website that, and actually this was a lady who, she likes to research, you know, women in history or whatever, and I could look it up for you and send it to you later. But it was in 2018, and your first Cop Sisters book was before that, correct?
Yeah.
Because she tells the whole story, and then she's like, wow, they need to really make this into a book. And I'm like, okay, I guess you didn't look too far into the history because it is already. But she had an interesting snippet that she said that it was when Constance was buried, like at her funeral, it was revealed to her who her father was. So do you
that is the story that I got from Fleurette's son. So so she would have heard me say that in an interview or something. Yeah.
Okay, so that's probably where that came from then. Okay.
so when Fleurette went away with the dancing girls and the troupe, was that real, or did you just make that up?
No, she, to my knowledge, she never actually toured with anyone. She did want to be on the stage, and I've got newspaper clippings of her trying out for singing competitions and stuff like that. So she definitely did have ambitions for the stage, but I think she gets to do more of that in my books than she maybe got to do in real life.
Oh, okay.
And she did not work for them as a seamstress or anything like that. That was just kind of to tie in with the May Ward.
Right. I mean, she definitely did a lot of, her whole life, she did a lot of seamstressing type of work. Fleurette's son told me that for a while she worked in New York City for Vogue. You know the Vogue sewing patterns?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It would be her job to take the dress that the designer had made and to figure out how to turn that into a tissue paper pattern.
Oh,
Wow.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So she did that for a while, and she was at one time a very successful kind of tailor. If you were a wealthy woman, you know, all the doctors' wives or the lawyers' wives or whoever way back then. She would dress you from head to toe all year long. She'd make everything that some of these women wore. So yeah.
That's very cool. And the whole thing with May Ward, Constance did actually have to go and arrest her.
Yes.
Because of the man or whatever, because of the accusations. Again, we're talking about, like what you said, Frank Sinatra got arrested for. That was really the same thing, right? It's the Mann Act.
Right.
So
Yeah. So Constance really did get called in New York City to try to rescue May Ward, a vaudeville actress, from having been kidnapped or something, having fallen into the clutches of some vile and terrible men. And that turned out not to be at all true. It was just that her husband, Freeman Bernstein, was angry that she had hired a different manager because he was her manager. That's what he did for a living. He was a vaudeville manager. But so he called the police out of spite. So that's the whole story between Constance and Freeman Bernstein. But I loved, the more I found out about May Ward and Freeman Bernstein, the more I wanted to make them recurring characters. And in fact, I have since met Freeman, one of Freeman Bernstein's descendants.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, who wrote a biography about him.
Oh.
And his name's Walter Shapiro. He's a political reporter. He's been around. I think he was a speechwriter for Jimmy Carter. He's been around forever, covering politics. And he wrote this book about his great uncle Freeman. And in his research about Freeman Bernstein, he had run across Constance Kopp and thought, oh, somebody ought to write a book about that. So when I got in touch with him, he was like, I know who you're talking about. And so I can't believe you've written books. So anyway, it's great because I've made Freeman and May Ward recurring characters, and I have his book to kind of refer back to, but also he just remembers all these stories about Freeman growing up. So, so Freeman is a much shadier character than I even made him out to be, but fortunately I have the permission of his descendants to run with that.
So is May Ward his mother, or was it a different mother?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I said, is May Ward his mother?
Oh, no. Freeman and May Ward did not have any children. So this was an uncle. This was like his dad's uncle. Yeah.
That's
So I wanted to know, like, do you relate like more to Constance or Fleurette or Norma? Like, do you feel like you're like any of them?
Well, I think the thing about Constance is I really think she has to have felt a little like a misfit,
Yeah.
and we can all relate to that, right?
Yeah.
Constance in real life, she was 6 feet tall. She weighed 100
Yeah, that's tall.
pounds. And at that time, the average man would have been only 5'7" or 5'8" before World War I. So she looked down on everyone she met, even the guys. So I'm sure she stuck out. Literally,
Yeah.
she stuck out.
Right.
But also, and in those days, if you weren't going to get married and have kids, that was weird. It's not so weird anymore.
No.
But at that time, that was extreme. So I think that, and the fact that she wanted a career, and then she took this career path that was extremely provocative. People didn't like it. Nobody was cheering, "You go, girl," over Constance. I mean, I'm sure there were some women who were, but she was met with hostility day after day after day. I can't imagine showing up to work and having to deal with that level of hostility. I think I'd fall to pieces in the first 10 minutes. And
Yeah.
what I'm supposed to do, but not Constance. So, she's a really incredible person. But she had to have felt like, I don't really fit with this world. Like it had to have been a struggle for her. And I don't know, we can also relate to that, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Like, and I don't ever like to get political in my groups or anything like that, but sometimes it's almost impossible to not realize. You say, wow, we've come so far, but then you think sometimes, but then it's not so far. When you think of things that still happen to women and things like that, it's amazing the ground that she broke, but yet the things that she was trying to help protect the young women from and things like that are also still things we need to worry about protecting young women from now.
Yeah, it's, I know, I'm surprised sometimes at the parallels, even though it was so long ago. So like those of you, if you've read this one, or wait, no, I'm getting confused. The newest one. When you read the newest one, there's a story of a young woman named Beulah Binford in this book, and I won't get off into her whole story, but it's a true story. And it's so similar to the kind of like public shaming that can happen with social media today.
Mhm.
I was just amazed. I was amazed at how similar the parallels. It's like, wow, that's not changed very much. It
No,
just looks a
just
little
happens in a different way now.
happens
That's
in a
all.
different way. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
That's
exactly.
amazing.
Back then, women weren't even allowed to vote. So I mean,
Right.
Right.
they were like really like almost like property, you know, it was like so different.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, right. I think it's important to remember. I mean, we were not citizens. We did not have full citizenship. And you know, it took a long time. I mean, after we got the vote, you know, many of you might remember that as recently as the 70s, we couldn't get credit cards in our own name.
Yeah,
You know, our
that's
husbands
right.
had to sign,
That's
Yeah.
right.
or a business loan, or anything. I met a woman at one of my events who said, you know, I had to get my husband to sign a permission slip before I could have a hysterectomy. Like they wouldn't.
Yep. Oh, back then you
go
did.
into the
Yep.
hospital.
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
Wow.
And that's
That's unbelievable.
that's recent. This is
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
own time. So we're not that far away from all of that. And I think young women kind of forget that. You know, they don't remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What really surprised you about that, about when you were doing your research on, you know, women's rights and that sort of thing? Was there something that stood out to you that really surprised you about that time?
Yeah, well, the thing that, I mean, you'll notice that it comes up a few times, and it's because I'm so interested in it, is this, the fact that we had the ability back then to lock women up on these morality crimes.
Right, right.
With no court case, no recourse, no right to appeal, no legal representation.
Right.
And it started with the passage of the Mann Act somewhere in the 1910s. And then in World War I, it's really fascinating what started to happen in World War I, because there was all this concern about immoral activity around the army camps. You know, we didn't have a proper military yet. There wasn't really a standing army, and we didn't have military bases here in the US. We didn't have any of that. And the people who were alive in World War I remembered the Civil War. Like, that's how recent. So they remembered that during the Civil War, there was a lot of immoral activity around army camps and a lot of girls getting into trouble and that sort of thing. They didn't want that to happen again. And the solution in World War I was to round up the girls and just lock them up.
Amazing.
So, yeah, I mean, the men were fine. The men got to go on their merry way. But in that case, it was called the American Plan is what it was called. And some of those women got locked up for decades. Like, it wasn't just like overnight. It was weeks, months, years. So
Wow.
Did they get locked up in prison, or did they go to insane asylums? What?
it would be like reform homes,
Okay.
girls' reformatories.
Wow.
Yeah, so that whole issue, the whole kind of like policing and women getting locked up in institutions, whether it is an insane asylum or I mean, that's all very interesting to me because, you know, that is something that's completely not a part of our world anymore. We don't, none of us, well, I mean, there's still jail, but other than that, it's remarkable that so much of that went on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Did you see the movie about the female reporter where she actually had herself committed into an institution to study how women were locked up for whatever complaint their husband had? She didn't do whatever he wanted, and they would have her committed.
Was this, I mean, is this real person?
Yeah, it's real.
Talking about Nellie Bly here?
Fanny, was it Fanny? It was a female reporter. I'll have to look it up.
Well, was it Nellie Bly?
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh no, Nellie
was
Bly is
amazing.
amazing, and you can read Nellie Bly's work. You can find her stuff collected in a book.
There's a movie about that. It's amazing.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah. No, I love Nellie Bly. She was something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was born in Brooklyn. The only Nellie Bly I knew was like there was a park, Nellie Bly. And so now I totally learned something today. I honestly, of all the research that I did in preparing for this, never came across Nellie Bly. So
I think
it might be, look into.
It might be on Netflix or Amazon Prime, but I know I watched it online.
Yeah.
That'll be
Cool.
interesting. That's a
Yeah,
good one.
she went through a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the women that came before us and blazed the way.
Yes, they
Yeah.
did.
For real. What I had wanted to
I
ask
had
you,
a-
we're kind of talking how things have changed but stayed the same. Like in terms of the media, there's a lot of articles that, and you have, I love it that you have like sometimes the actual reproductions of certain articles, but you did address in there that depending on the paper, the story could be written just completely differently. Like, did you have a hard time figuring out like, okay, somewhere in here is probably the truth, but how much of it has really been distorted based on, you know, whatever point that newspaper wanted to make?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. There's just a lot of just straight up mistakes, and those are usually easy to spot. Like I could just go, okay, I know this did not happen in Newark. Like,
Right.
so that kind of stuff is easy to figure out. But yeah, you know, it's funny with the newspapers because, and again, it's so interesting how these issues come up cyclically, and here we are 100 years later and all that. Because we like to talk about bias in the media today, but in those days, there was no sense that the media should be unbiased. So the local newspapers in Bergen County, it was the Bergen County Democrat and the Hackensack Republican. Like those were the names of the newspapers, and that was totally fine. Like nobody objected to that. That was the deal. So that's an interesting thing that the unbiased, that's a notion in journalism that came along a little later. That's a little newer idea. But the other thing is just no fact checking at all, right? So they were very clearly making up quotes. And I know because I've written for the New York Times, I've written for major newspapers before, they do an incredible amount of fact checking. They drive you insane with their fact checking. Like the kinds of stuff I've had to prove to them is just like, come on, guys. But so the standards were very different. It was kind of the Wild West at that point. So yeah, at a certain point, I just get to pick and choose which version of events I like.
Right. Wow.
You can't know.
Sandra, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
I've just been fascinated by the discussion. So do you have any of your characters that you see in our current headlines or people that you see today that you would say resemble any of your characters or remind you of any of your characters?
Well, yeah, for sure. And it's not that I went looking for it. It's just that there they were. And so, like I mentioned earlier, this young woman who's in Cop Sisters on the March, her name was Beulah Binford. And I won't get into what happened to Beulah and what the story was, but it was a national story. It was a massive scandal. And the whole country knew Beulah Binford's name. And they knew it so well that 10 or 20 years later, there would be newspaper articles that would say, we've had another Beulah Binford style scandal. And they don't even explain who she is because the assumption is everyone knows that name. And so like that immediately made me think of Monica Lewinsky.
Right.
I don't have to, no one has to explain who she is. We all know that name.
Right.
And then you think, well, and so Beulah's problem was, how do I go through life with this name? What am I going to do? How do I get a job? How do I, and you have to think that must have been the deal for Monica Lewinsky. Like, how do you show up for a restaurant reservation and say, table 2 for Monica Lewinsky? Like, you can't. So I was interested in that idea. I mean, their stories are very different, but I was just that notion of like, your name does not belong to you. So that, and there were definitely some, there's a lot with just kind of the policing issues and women officers and questions about what women can and can't do as police officers that, you know, we still do talk about that. I mean, today,
yes, we do.
Today, women make up about 13% of sworn officers nationwide, and that's a small amount. And in the military, we've had a lot of talks about, you know, do women have the physical strength and this and that to do all the different jobs? So, So yeah, it's very easy to find things in today's headlines and to find people and go, okay, well, yeah, we've been here before.
Mhm. Yep.
I actually thought, and again, like I don't try to get political, but I mean, it's out there. I mean, things happen. When I was reading this book in particular, it made me feel like there was a lot of a parallel with the whole Me Too movement, and that, you know, women were finally coming out and speaking about all these things that had happened over many decades. And I guess the original intention maybe of the laws that were in place was to try to protect young girls from these kinds of things not happening. But then it just got taken advantage of by the men that were in power. So things were perpetuated against women and young girls anyway. And it was just that whole same thing of, like you said, it's a parallel victimization. It's just different. It's just,
yeah, I mean, right. The idea at the time, because see, in the 1910s, women were moving into cities for the first time and getting jobs and living on their own. Before that, we went from our parents' house to our husband's house, and we never lived on our own, and we didn't have jobs. There weren't jobs really. I mean, maybe some school teachers and nurses here and there, but other than that, so and so there they are in the cities, and then you start to see some wicked behavior in the cities. And so the thought is, well, these innocent, precious, innocent girls are getting drawn into the wickedness of the city, and we need to get them out again. It's like the focus was always very much on the women. Like, you know, if you're going to voluntarily run around with a man you're not married to, then you're a serious threat to good social order. And so we need to deal with you, the woman. It's always her. So yeah, no, that's just that's where we were back then. And so it did very much become community by community. Even here in Portland, there's a fascinating book about Portland's first policewoman. And she was very focused on all the shenanigans going on in the bars downtown, rounding up those girls. And that was her. She would go to the beach and check out their bathing suits and, you know, like make sure they were covered up. And it was all about that.
Yeah.
We had our own special police force devoted to making sure we didn't step out of line.
was that around the same era, around the 19 teens? Around the same
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? I think we still have some more on this list that I made. If somebody else has, go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, I find it very interesting how you've woven together the fiction with the nonfiction, or the, you know, the actual historical events. And I just how did you accomplish that?
Well, what I do is I take the real events to the extent that I know them, and I can kind of lay those out on a timeline and say, okay, well, here's what's going to happen. But then there's a lot that's missing. You know, there's a lot that's missing about why did people do the things they did, and what happened before, and what happened after, and what was the outcome of that, or what were the consequences of that I don't know. So it can kind of become kind of obvious. And then also, we all expect a story to take a certain shape. We've gotten used to books and movies that have, you know, a beginning and a middle and an end, and certain elements along the way. Real life doesn't work like that. I mean, my life does not have that kind of interesting story arc. But for some reason, it doesn't feel real to us unless we see that. So then it becomes a question of, well, how do I kind of arrange this so it fits the shape of a story and not the shape of real life, which is kind of just on and on and on. And then it usually becomes pretty obvious where I need to maybe create a character who can move things forward or cause trouble or whatever, you know, whatever's kind of missing there. So yeah, it gets to be a lot about just filling in the gaps and creating drama where there needs to be more drama, and having consequences to actions and outcomes, and, you know, like figuring out everything's got to land somewhere, you know, so you guys, you know, what happens when it lands, and how do we tie it all up and put a nice neat bow around it so it feels satisfying to read.
How long does it take you to write a book, write one of them? How long did it take?
Well, they're all a year apart.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm doing a book a year right now.
Wow.
A book a year, wow.
Yeah.
You must do a lot of research.
It's a
fact checking.
Yeah, it's a full-time job.
So is
It is my
is,
full-time job.
It
so.
is your full-time job. Yeah.
is your first love plants, and what your other subjects or books are about? They're plants and bugs, and is
Yeah,
that your love?
I wrote 6 nonfiction books that were all kind of about the natural world in one way or another, and one book kind of led to the next. You can always find the idea for the next book in the previous one if you know where to look. It's always in there.
Right.
Yeah, but I was always trying to write fiction at the same time, so I have a few failed novels in drawers that happened along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is this your first series, I guess real like published series of fiction? Like, 'cause the books that I found before, like Joanne was saying, was mostly those nonfiction books.
Right. Yeah, I wrote 6 nonfiction books, and then these.
Yeah, because what I thought was amazing, and I don't know if this is something that everybody else agrees with. I don't know if we've talked about it too much recently. What I found particularly helpful, like to really get into your stories, is your descriptions, like of the locations, like the physical presence, the rooms and the environment, and also the clothing. Like I find the way you describe it, it makes me feel like you're standing there looking at it and you're telling me what it looks like, and I can really imagine it, which was so much different than a book we had read previously, a similar story about a female cop, and all of that was based on another true person, but that was lacking. So we just kind of felt like the reporting of facts. Your books, I feel like, have really, it just gives you so much more of a visual and a feeling. Yeah. So how did you, like, where was that? You're writing about plants and you're writing nonfiction, and then you have all of this amazing prose and these descriptions.
Yeah, well, it's really a lot of research. I mean, I really I have a Sears catalog from 1908 sitting over here, and I'll go look. I figure their stuff wasn't all brand new, right? Like most of my stuff, like my clothes aren't from this year; they're from 5 years ago. So 1908's about right. And yeah, so I go looking for like the stuff and what it looked like, and I have a lot of old photographs, like those Arcadia Press books about local history.
Yes.
I have those for every town, and interestingly, like Sheriff Heat's dad is in one of them, so like those books are super useful. So yeah, I'm always looking for pictures of like, well, what did this building look like? What did the street look like? Even like antique dealers, like sometimes I'll go looking for, well, what kind of desk would this person have sat in? And I'll go to look at antique dealers and see what they have for sale that maybe fits their out. So
that just adds, don't you guys feel like that it adds so much more to the believability and the reality of the story? I feel like
it does. It really did. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to look up what a Mackinac jacket or coat was. You mentioned that Norma coat was her Mackinac coat. I'm like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, I like it when I have to make people go look things up. Sometimes
I did too.
Sometimes my copy editor will mark things and go, I'm not sure people are going to know what that means. And I'm like, good.
Yeah.
Look it up, they'll learn, right?
Go look up the dictionary. Go find out. That's great.
Well, Amy, I could tell you don't see the behind the scenes of this group, but if they've read your book, it's a high compliment, because if they don't like it, they stop reading. It's not the fictional book club.
Yeah. Well,
they're very tough critics, and they definitely enjoy your work. So
that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me. This has really been a lot of fun. I always enjoy talking to folks, and I hope one of these days I'll be able to travel again, and you might see me out there. It's my publicist at my publishing house has a sister in Toms River, so she likes to send authors to the library there. So that can happen again.
Well, there you go. You come to the library when it's open and people can travel again, like in groups. We'll have a field come see you at the library. That'd be amazing.
Yes.
That would be amazing.
No, this has really been awesome.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Very much.
Well,
I just ordered your first 3 books.
Oh,
the
great.
series.
If you read more of them and you want to talk about them again, you can call me back up, whether you're in person or, well, you won't still be at home because this can't go on forever, but call me back if you want to talk about more of them. And also you can find me, just stay in touch. Like I have a website and a newsletter and I'm on social media, so I'm easy to find. So I hope you'll stay in touch with me and let me know what you think.
Well, I know that I'm going to. I mean,
Yes.
my group of ladies here, I mean, avid readers, and just like you can see, nobody's shy. This has just been a lot of fun, and I would love it. Maybe when we read the next couple of books,
Yeah, we'll do it again.
In
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Anybody
Yeah,
have
like
parting
that.
questions for Amy? A parting question?
Nope.
No, not me.
All
This has
right.
been a lot of fun.
Thank
Thank
Stay
you.
well and
so
keep writing.
very much, Amy. Really.
Thank
This
you.
has been a
All right.
blast.
It's been
It was a
pleasure.
pleasure,
It
an
was, it
absolute
really
pleasure.
was.
Bye-bye.
Very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Everybody
Okay.
stay
It's
safe.
delightful.
Stay well.
Andrea,
You
thank
as
you.
well.
It opens up for you out there soon.
Stay
Bye.
well.
Andrea, thank
Okay.
you for making this happen for everybody.
Yes, thank
Yep,
you.
thank you, Andrea.
Oh, you
Yes.
guys, thank you, guys. Thanks for sticking with me all these last 3 months.
You've been
Great.
keeping us sane, Angie.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
It's true.
Definitely.
Yay.
Well,
Bye-bye,
group
guys.
hug. Group
Thank
hug,
you.
everybody.
Group hug.
Virtual hug.
Virtual.
Take care.
Thank you.
everybody.
Take
guys.
care.
Take care,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Stay well.
Bye.